if you want to get unique with imagery, like why not try to find a different way to get into um, that environment than just the visual side of things? Like, I
Hello, writers and crafters. I'm Valerie Isan,
and I'm Eric Mertz.
and this is episode 160 of the podcast, and it's June 26th, 2024, as we record this. Today, we're going to be talking about using imagery in our writing. But first, we want to thank our existing patrons for believing in our work offline and here on the podcast. You can become a patron of the arts at patreon.com/Valerie Isan for books, writing instruction, coaching, and planning. And you can go to patreon.com/Strange Air Stories for short stories in the paranormal mystery genre. We do have a listener comment, Eric. It was on
Mm.
YouTube. There was a suggestion that it was on the video about if permafreeze still works.
Hmm.
And the suggestion was that if we're going to be talking about a specific thing, like to timestamp the video,
Oh,
because our intros are pretty long. I mean, that's I think the beauty of our of our show is that it is very conversational, and we do talk about a lot of things, and we do have a couple segments, before the main topic starts. So we do chit
I
chat
like
a little
this.
bit, but
Here
it
we
is
go.
a cool idea to like timestamp it. Like, okay, if you want the info on the topic, here's where you start. So I'll have to do some research on how to do that. I think it's pretty easy to do in YouTube, but I just need to figure out how to do it.
Yeah, yeah. YouTube allows you to like, yeah, you can go in and kind of drop pins on certain points. So great, great,
Okay.
great idea. Yeah.
Yeah,
If
I
you
like
don't
that
want to hear about what
suggestion.
I'm reading and you just want to get to the meat
Yeah.
of it, there you go.
Okay, so announcements. The writing retreat and workshop registration is open. We do have day passes now. So we've got a 3-day pass and a day pass available at valerieisan.com/retreat. So you can go there for all the info. I my writing how-to book is out now. That's getting a lot of sales, actually. I'm happy about that.
Nice.
My Focus and Finish book is out, the book on goal setting. I'm already thinking about which nonfiction book to write next. Like, do I write book 2 in the Focus and Finish series? Because it's got a lot already there. That's going to be like strategies for authors. Or if I should write how to write a memoir, because I've written a couple of those. So maybe that would be my next nonfiction book. So anyway, I'm just trying to decide about that. Nothing's like jumping out of me quite yet, but that's kind of in
Right.
my husband asked me a couple days ago, when are you going to write another novel? And I'm like, I'm totally willing. The spirit is willing. Like, I just not getting the ideas. So, as soon as a fiction
Interesting.
idea comes in,
I'll pass one along if you
I was
need
gonna say,
one.
you're gonna loan me some ideas.
I'm, I'm, I've got them to spare, I think,
I
these
have
days.
so I do have several ideas that I've collected over the years and kind of fleshed out a character really and like a what
Right.
if situation. And that's as far as I've gone. And I don't know if I'm kind of, this is going to sound, well, I'm not going to put a judgment on it. I'll just say it and then you
Sure.
could judge
Say,
me.
sure. I'll do it silently.
I, none of them are like screaming, pick me. And I don't know if that's because it's not the right story at the right time, or if I just want it to be easy and it's not easy. So I don't want to start it. I don't know which one of those it is. And I fear that it's well, it sounds too hard. So that's what's happening with me right now around fiction or just at
Right.
all. Like, what story do I write next? I don't know.
If I can drop 2 cents here, I think sometimes that screaming to you, like for me, is just it has I think every writer has their has tos. Like it has
Mm-hmm.
to do this or I can't.
Mm-hmm.
That's, I think if we had Kimbu on here, she'd say it's different, than I say it. And
Mm-hmm.
any other author we've ever had on here would say something different. But for me, it's like, and I was talking about it last night because I was teaching at Garden Home Writers, the community library, their writers group. And it's just sometimes like, I just think of it as like locked up. Like, something is a story is locked up until it's not. And when it's not locked anymore, then it just has to be written. And
Mm-hmm.
you'll find it. Something will just unlock one of those ideas you've been tinkering with, and then
Mm-hmm.
suddenly here it is.
There it
You'll write
is.
that novel, and Ali will say, "Oh my gosh, this is the novel." Um, Hopefully.
Hopefully, yeah.
Yeah.
I think part of the issue is that the ideas that are coming to me all have some sort of historical bent to them, which means a lot of research because I don't want to like just put out, I don't want to write a book that is supposed to be a historical novel and not do any research and have it be like, I don't know, just generic regurgitation of what I've seen of that era from, Netflix or something. You know what I mean? I have to research it. And I guess I
Well,
just don't want to get stuck there. And
now I'm going to push back on you a tiny bit and say that I think that, and part of this I experienced because the most recent thing I wrote had a historical element to it.
mm-hmm,
Um, I think like that is has been a barrier. Like I think it's a barrier that I will sometimes create for myself. Like I'll put that out there as an extra challenge. But I think if you're writing something historical, like how many drafts are you writing? I think if you know the character, you know the story, you know the situation, if you're in that space,
mm-hmm.
um, and the only thing unlock that you need to unlock is what did trappers in the 1880s call biscuits. Um, I I don't
You
know where
can
that
look
example
that
came from.
up. Yeah, I get what
You
you're
can look that
saying.
up. And
Yeah.
I think like, as we're going to talk about imagery, like sometimes you just, sometimes people rewrite in passes. And if maybe you're just going to
Yeah.
have to write a book and then do a pass on
On the historical. Yeah, you're
historical
totally
element.
right. And that is how I revise. That is how I write. My process is to just do that first draft without stopping as much as possible. And then I go in and do the setting. And then I go in and do does it have all the elements? And then I go, yeah. So I totally do it in passes. So I could do a historical pass, a
Yeah, I do a
research
series
pass.
pass. I do a series pass. Like I'll go through
Ooh.
and say, I'll just write the story
Mm-hmm.
and then I'll say, okay, like now I need to, and I'll go through and I'll do the rewrites until I'm sure it's right. And then I'll say, okay, I got to do, and this is always like a very light pass, but it's like, what is the street name where the police department is in Whistler's Grove? Like I don't have that on the top of mind when I'm writing, and I don't want to slow myself down when I'm
Mm-hmm.
there to go like, oh, what did I call that street again? So I'll go through and do a series pass. Like, oh, the
So do
person
you
that
have like a
works at the,
series Bible or do you just go
I
through
have,
your okay.
yeah, I have a series Bible, but I don't like, as soon as I start looking over at the series Bible, what'll happen if I'm doing that while I'm writing the story, and now I'm doing, look at me, I'm doing hands. Like if I do that during the writing, during the like the hard drafting phase, then I end up like, oh, look at that shiny thing. Hey, there's a character I haven't explored. Maybe I could do a whole series of short stories on them. So I have to like focus
Uh-huh.
on, and when it's time to get type A about, okay, what was
What's
the
the
name of
street
the mini
name?
mart?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, what was the hotel where Charlene Browner was found? Like all those things like come later. So I don't know. I
That's a
think
cool idea. I
lighten
thank
the
you for
load on
saying
those
that.
first drafts. Yeah.
Yeah.
I
Okay.
because I'm with Ali. Like if Ali and I were sitting together, your husband and I would be like, damn, I want her next book too. And
I've been
I want a
publishing.
novel.
I added up my books yesterday. I have published 6 books. So I think that's pretty rad.
Nice. We could
But
get a plastic rings, put them all in the plastic rings. You could, you'd have a 6 pack. You'd walk around with it. That's great.
they're all not in the same genre though. So that I
That's
think
fine.
is what has made me not as successful maybe as you. But
Define success. I mean, you get to define success.
that's true. Yes. Okay, so author up. Oh no, we're still on announcements. You do you have any announcements?
Yeah, so plenty. I just last night I taught short stories, how to win the submission game. I taught that at Garden Home Community Library at their writers group. I will also be teaching September 7th at Southwest Washington Writers Conference. I will also, drum roll, be at Write in the Harbor in Tacoma, Washington, the
Yay,
first
me
weekend
too. Me
in
too. Me
November.
too.
We're gonna
Yay. We
we're
can
gonna be there at the same
carpool.
time. Oh
Yeah.
my gosh, this is
That's
fantastic.
amazing. We were just
Ladies and
talking about this
gentlemen,
last time that we never get on the same circuit. Yay.
right? Well, here's the funny thing about Right in the Harbor. I get a phone call Thursday. Like Thursday and Friday of last week were a special kind of like madness when it comes to phone calls and just things happening. I get this phone call, and while in the midst of another phone call from Tacoma, and it was this person who says, "Are you sure you like we have like 24 hours left for you to accept your offer to teach it right in the harbor? You haven't accepted it yet." And I said, "What?" So I called the lady back and I said, "What do you mean I was accepted for right in the harbor?" And she said, "Well, look in your spam folder." And I go to I'm sitting here, I go to my spam folder and say, "Oh, the answer is yes." I mean, heck yeah, I want to do this. Um, but it was just so funny because like in business, like checking my spam folder has been a necessity.
Oh man.
And I overlooked it. I almost missed the opportunity. So yeah, I'll be doing that with you, apparently. Um,
Yay.
this is gonna be great. And then I'm allowed to say that I am officially the host of Ghost Story Weekend
Mm.
for Wordcrafters in Eugene. That's going to be, I think it's the 20, I don't know, it's one of the weekends in October. It's the weekend before Halloween.
Okay.
Um, so I will be the host of that event, and I'm super excited.
Yeah. I
Lots of
knew
stuff to
about it.
do.
I knew about it last time, but I couldn't say anything.
Oh, and last week also I was a featured guest on KBOO Radio's Once Upon a Time writing show. I got to go down into Portland, like down into the inner southeast, and go on KBOO Radio to talk about writing, which was a real blast. It was real
That's
fun.
awesome.
Yeah.
Is there like an archive of the show that we can link in the show
We are
notes?
all waiting on that over here because my wife and child did not get to hear that.
Oh,
And so we keep checking for the art, the recording. But once that's out, I will be putting that out everywhere. So
okay.
it is community radio. So like it's a definite they've been at it forever. KBOO is a great station if you're in Portland. They have a variety of a wide variety of programs, but it's volunteer run. It is the engineer was running into the room as we were taking our seats. It was pretty funny. I'm down, I've got the headphones on, and the host is looking into the room, and I'm like, "What are you looking for?" She says, "I think the engineer will show up," and I'm like, "Yeah."
I hope
So
so.
he goes barreling in. There's like 90 seconds left until the show starts. It was pretty funny. So
I had a
loved it.
question about your Accidental Stranger book two. Is that pre-order up yet or no?
It is not up yet.
Okay. I just wanted to make sure that there was not a link that I needed to have.
I'm gonna say I'll probably have the link up in the next like I'm gonna start the pre-order process probably this weekend, if not Friday.
Okay.
Um, yeah.
Okay.
Well,
Cool.
you know my announcements better than me. I'm just gonna ask you to make them for me because you remember stuff I don't.
Okay. Well, I think author update is next.
I'm writing. That's just kind of it. I've got a lot of client work I'm backed up on, so I'm trying to catch up to that. Which is good. I like it's a nice way to sort of pause my creative side
Mhm.
and work on client work. I did create kind of the summer is going to be crazy here, just on a family personal level. So I've like heavily like I've lightened expectations. I've just sort of like leaned into finishing some things. So I made a list of short stories and things that I've just had in process. And I've said, you know what? Like, let's just make this next 3 months about taking a vacation, getting the kid to camp on time, finishing client work, and then like when I can get to these stories and get them done, that's what we'll do. So
Cool. That's a good
yeah,
plan.
yeah.
My plan continues to be my burnout recovery plan. I don't know if patrons are listening, they'll know I've got my burnout recovery plan on Patreon, and I'm updating my patrons on how that's going. And I'm in week 2 or 3. I think this is officially week 2 of my burnout recovery plan, which sounds kind of funny actually when you think about it.
Kind of
If
does.
you're burnt, like an oxymoron, I've got a plan. Let's hurry up and work on this plan so I can recover from burnout. Does seem a little bit, but the plan does involve a lot of time off and some rest. And um, I'm doing like the bare essentials for running my business, like checking my emails and bank balances and, you know, coaching work and my bookstore shifts and this podcast, and Patreon stuff. So I'm doing that, but I'm not like working on writing projects or like email newsletters or, anything like that. I'm not working on the business, just sort of like keeping it afloat until I can kind of just rest a little bit. The pain, my back is much better, but it's still stiff, and my knee's improving, but it's way slower than I want it to be. And I have an ultrasound scheduled for tomorrow just to make sure everything is healing and doing what it's supposed to in there. But we were talking about before we hit record, we were talking about aging and and I'm just seeing the need to focus on my health a little bit more these days. And I also have feelings around that, like what does that mean? And does that, I'm newly 50. So now I'm having thoughts about like, oh, well, it used to be this way, like recovering from injury, it used to be much faster or whatever. Like the things that in my toolbox that worked before are starting to fray around the edges and not work as well. So that means either I need new tools or I need to just not push myself as much. And for someone who's driven and has a lot of, plans and ideas and wants to just get out and do and I'm a pretty zestful person, like I love learning. I love being out there and doing the thing and public speaking and teaching and writing and coaching. And I love all this stuff. I love business. I love all of that. And I just want to do it, do it, do it, do it. And I think that maybe my physical and mental condition doesn't allow me to, not condition. That makes it sound like I have a condition, but you know what I mean? Yeah. Like, okay, I'm 50 now. So I don't want that to mean anything. I want it to just continue like, oh, it's just an age. It's just a number. I'm going to keep going, keep going, keep going. But the reality is that my energy is finite and I have to do less, I think. And I have feelings around that and I have to process that. And I think that has contributed a little bit to the burnout as well. So after resting for the rest of the month as much as possible around the edges of what I'm doing essential wise, I'm going to start looking then at, okay, what's real? What is reality for me? And what can I realistically, because I'm not a very realistic person, I've decided. So I just think I can do more than I can. And I have to really have that, come to Jesus moment with myself and say, all right, this is who you are now. And this is what you need now, physically, mentally, emotionally. Like, this is how you can work from here on out. And, try to come up with a much more practical plan and be okay with that and not feel, bad about doing less or making that mean anything. Do you know what I mean?
Everything she just said, I agree with. Yeah. I mean, and realistically, like, yeah. I mean, I don't think we realize as people it's a marathon until we're when you're young, it's a sprint. And then when you get to this point, it's like, oh, right, this is a marathon and I have to run, you have to run a little differently and you have to, I don't know. I think that if we're wise, we catch up to this sooner than later, but, nothing like the present. I don't know. I feel the same way. There's a lot of things that I say to myself, like, guess what? You don't get to do this so much anymore. You don't get to do that so much anymore. And if you want to keep doing this, then, whatever it is,
Hmm.
it has to be the product of intention. It's not the product of just being here. And yeah, I mean, we can look fondly on our youth and say,
Remember when?
remember when,
My
remember when.
goal all through the last, I don't know, 3 years or so, I've known like, okay, I am aging. And my goal for aging, Erick, is to just do it gracefully and not like not be someone who's fighting tooth and nail through it and being upset about all of the changes in my body or changes,
Yeah.
in and just do it with grace and hopefully
But
some
I think you can also
flexibility.
do it. I mean, we're now leaning into a whole topic, but I think you can do it. You can do it gracefully, but I think you can also do it with having at least some ambition in mind. Like, I think sometimes when I hear people say like aging gracefully, it's like, well, I'm just going to let myself slide go wherever I
No,
go.
no,
And
no,
it's
just
like,
the opposite. I mean,
yeah,
aging gracefully, like taking yoga seriously so that I can reach my feet to put my socks on when I'm 70.
right.
You know what I mean? Like, I
Yeah,
just want to
yeah,
be able to like be healthy for as long as possible.
yeah. I
And I
get that.
remember, do you remember Joe Penn said years ago, years and years ago, about she had this moment years and years ago when she wrote the Healthy Writer book
Yeah,
with the doctor. And she said something that has stuck with me about like, I have to take care of my body so that I can be a writer. It seemed
yeah,
it was like a mindset shift. It was like the other way around. Like we keep wanting to stay at the desk and work because there's so many ideas and we have so much to do. But if we don't take care of our bodies and leave the desk sometimes, we can't get back to the desk. We won't be able to. We'll have too many
yeah,
injuries or whatever.
yeah,
So I keep reminding myself of that. Like if I want to live this life, I have to take care of my body. So
yeah,
anyway,
yep. You do.
we have rambled on that a little bit long. I am going to be speaking Alaska Writers Guild Conference in Anchorage in October, Write in the Sound in Gig Harbor in November with you. That's so awesome. Last week, I finished reading In a Dark, Dark Wood by Ruth Ware. And I am currently reading The Manor House Governess by C.A. Castle. Very cool. It's
Hmm.
like a modern gothic queer story. I really like it, actually. I think it might be my new staff pick.
What was the name of the book? Manor House by who?
The Manor House Governess by
By.
C.A. Castle.
I like how there's like three different names for buildings: Manor, House, Castle in that right there. Like, I mean,
Yeah.
who else is going to write a book called Manor House
Governess.
Governess other than somebody named Castle?
Yeah.
That's the way it works. It's probably, is it a pen name? I wonder if it's a pen name.
I don't know.
I am reading this book jumped Stephen King in the stack. I had the new Stephen King You Like It Darker on the desk, but one of my favorite literary podcasts, the Clay Temple Media Elder Sign podcast, reviewed a short story by Anders Fager, who's a Swedish author. And they reviewed a story called Grandma's Journey. And this is the third time this podcast has led me to buy a collection of short stories. So hats off to those guys. Swedish Cults by Anders Fager is the book. It led me to. He's a Swedish sort of horror writer. He's often called H.P. Lovecraft on acid. Um, it it is. I'm like three stories into it. It's pretty crazy, amazing, absolutely bizarre stuff. So it's
All
really
right.
good. Yeah,
Cool.
yeah. And it managed to jump over Stephen King in a stack, which is like a pretty rare thing. So
Well, as ever, links to these books will be in the show notes. So you can read along with us if you want, or take our recommendations.
Yeah.
All
Yeah,
right,
this one's
let's
a good one. It's a good one. You really, if you like weird fiction, this is weird and interesting stuff. So,
all right. Well, let's start talking about imagery. I just am teaching, I just finished up teaching. There's one more class left at Wordcrafters, a 6-week course on using imagery with your senses in creative nonfiction. But it goes across the board. You can obviously use imagery in fiction too.
right, right.
So, yeah, how do you want to get started talking about this?
I think I find the idea of imagery interesting when we talk about it in fiction because in one hand, imagery sort of, I think that it becomes I think it can be I think it can be intimidating because it calls to mind this idea of like beautiful, lucid, lurid, flowery prose. I think that's what it tend like for a lot of people who are looking at how do I write, um, imagery feels like that. And I think like dialing that back to a more realistic expectation is I guess where my head goes. Like we
Mhm.
need to incorporate imagery, but not every bit of imagery is like Marcel Proust spending 3 pages describing a cookie. It's it can be a lot of other things. It's like it can be whatever it needs to be for the story. If that's the introduction, like that's what comes to my mind
Yeah,
is
I think
like,
it's a tool.
yeah,
And I don't
important tool.
think that, so deciding what to describe in any story matters about, it matters what that is going to be to the story. Like the famous
Right.
quote on if you put the gun on the mantle in act 1, then you've got to be shooting it in act 3.
Chekhov's
So
gun. Absolutely.
so the same matters with any imagery. Like if you're
Right.
going to describe something for 3 pages, then, or 3 paragraphs, or even 3 sentences sometimes. Like if
Yeah.
you're really putting the reader's viewpoint on this thing that you're describing, then it's got to be important. So if your character walks into a room and is, scanning the room, looking for something or whatever, just scanning the room because they just walked in and they just want to observe what's going on in there, then the writer can put in a few sentences about what he sees, but it's understood by doing it that way that he is just the character, just scanning, like, oh, there's this and this and this. But if you decide as the author that something in this room is going to be really important to the story or to the character, or maybe it's a red herring, or maybe it's, foreshadowing or something. But if it's going to feature later, then you can spend more time kind of like introducing this thing to the reader. Just like any character that walks into a room, if it is just a throwaway character, like the gas attendant, at the gas station, you don't need to have a name because that will make the reader think, oh, I need to remember this person. So don't give it a name unless it's something that you're going to be referring back to later. Same goes with characters as it would be the imagery tool that you would use, I think.
Like when you talk about imagery as a part of setting, I think there's first off, it's tone setting, right? So if you're
Mm-hmm.
describing a bar, and it's pool balls and it smell, you can hear the pool balls, you can smell the taps, and and the neon glow, right there, that puts the reader into a place. So for that purpose, like the imagery is to just create tone and to create setting. But
Mm-hmm.
I think what you alluded to is that as that character enters the room, it's the action is not in the pool balls, and it's probably not in the taps, and it's probably not in the neon lights. Those are just there to create the scene. Imagery then becomes, do the, like what are they engaging with in the scene? Like what are the, what are they, what is the actual point of contact in that scene? The Chekhov's gun thing. Like what is the moment, what is the part of that imagery that we're going to come back to again and again and again, throughout the
Yeah.
story or throughout the scene or throughout, the series, if that's even, could be something like that.
So, yeah, the character interacting with the environment is a way to put description in without it feeling like you're spending two paragraphs talking about, the sunrise or the rain or whatever. So, in order to prevent, I think, I'm going to break in here and totally say something that's distracting me. I don't have my camera on because I'm having internet like issues, but I keep looking at the camera because I'm used to looking at
You're
the
used to
camera
it.
so that the YouTube
Yeah.
people, so I should be looking at you. All right. So, yes, character is interacting with the environment, and that enables us to describe what's going on without it being just an info dump of setting the scene.
And that's why I think that cliche about like too much description of weather
Mm-hmm.
is one to take seriously, because how often when you start with three sentences describing the clouds, the rain, the coming rain, the bite in the air, is that really affecting the story? Do you need to, is that necessary
But
imagery?
you can
If it,
save that though with the character. The character is battling the umbrella. The character is late for work and they run out to catch the bus, and a car drives by and splashes the new suit with water. And, like you can have
yeah,
the character interact with the environment and therefore telling the reader what the scene looks like without
right.
writing three sentences of "it was a dark and stormy night."
Right, right, exactly. Like it has to be relevant to the action, so
Mm-hmm.
dispense with some of the unnecessary imagery. And that, to me, that's a far more that's a far more vivid image, getting splashed with the bus pulling up on your new suit. That's a far more vivid image than in just the rain,
Mm-hmm.
because now I feel that bite of cold in the clothes and the
Mm-hmm.
disappointment of having to change and all the trickle down anticipation. So yeah, it's a deeper image than just the physical one.
And also, when you're writing imagery with the writing imagery with your senses, you talked about the pool hall and this the hearing the clacking of the balls and smelling the bar food and whatever. So, yes, using your senses to describe what's happening in the room, but also the visceral, um, the concrete sensory details about how a character feels about something. So when you're having a reaction to some conflict or tension in the scene, instead of, saying or telling that the character is feeling a certain way, you can use the senses to create that feeling in the reader instead by using the senses in the prose.
Right, right. And that's all imagery. I mean, it's just, I
It
think we get
is.
into, yeah, it's a different kind of imagery. I always, some of the best advice some of the best advice I was ever given was about the other senses, because we are very visual.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, again, like you can describe incoming cloud. I keep talking about incoming clouds because I'm looking out the window at
I know it's all cloudy here too.
an odd summer storm kind of passing through. It's like I can describe that visually because I'm a visual animal. We are visual animals, and that's familiar. Everybody's knows this. But I also think, like, if you want to get unique with imagery, like why not try to find a different way to get into um, that environment than just the visual side of things? Like, I came downstairs this morning. I could smell the sort of cooler air because we had a window open. I could smell it. It was
Mm-hmm.
like there's a different way to look at that, or to express that than just looking out the window and seeing it. So, um,
Yeah, and you
or
can
the,
layer in senses too when you are writing a scene. so that it does become more 3D for the reader.
Yeah.
So using that smell of the open window, and you can see the clouds rolling in. But if you then took it further and like listed out all of the five senses, maybe six, when it came to this summer storm coming in, would not be um, relevant. It would be
Right.
too overwhelming to the reader. It would be like, all right, we're talking about this summer storm a lot. So that means this summer storm is going to be coming up and it's going to be important. I know the character's going to, then the reader is
Right.
like extrapolating, like, oh, I think what's going to happen next is this. And if you build up something with no payoff, then it just becomes annoying to the reader. So when you are using senses in imagery, yes, layer in different ones besides visual, but be careful that what you're layering in, or be careful what you're
Yeah.
focusing on, is important to the story.
Right. And I think you can also do a lot of great work if you upset the expectation that it's, you work from sight to smell to tactile or something. Like you can
Mm-hmm.
work, if you work in reverse, especially if you're doing especially at heightened moments in a story, right? If a character walks into a room, the hair on their arms goes up first, tactile sensory
Mm.
imagery, then that cues them to look around, and then they see it. It's it upsets the expectation that the character sees the meaningful thing and then reacts. So I think there's not only knowing what images belong in a moment, but also understanding the expectations and playing with those to maximize the effect. Because that's ultimately what you're trying to do. You're trying to maximize every moment for dramatic effect. And even the boring moments, you're trying to maximize those too. Um, yeah, and sometimes it's just how you layer it, how it works.
That's really cool. I never thought about doing it in reverse order like that. Tactile first.
Well, it's a cinematic thing, right? If you look at a movie, like sometimes it's a sound cue it's either a sound cue, a reaction cue, or a visual cue. There's all kinds of ways that a character interacts with their environment, and especially if you're talking about thriller or anything with sort of heightened tension, you'll see that as the movie goes on, you get out of the strictly visual and you start to get into sound cues and extra sensory cues and all those things. And so if we bring that into fiction, um, I think our readers are very cinematically astute, and I think
Mhm.
you're giving them what they need in that way. But yeah, upset the normal order of things.
That's cool. Um, you you brought up something that made me think of metaphors and similes. Those are all that's all about imagery too. And
Yeah,
using metaphor and simile to create that fast, quick connection that
yeah.
will connect the reader with what's going on in the story. That's very effective too, but you can overdo it. I have read stuff where they've got like
Oh God, yeah.
four metaphors in one paragraph. Like, whoa, that's all over the place. We don't want to pinball the reader. And it's more like seasoning, like maybe one every few chapters or something like that. It's just a little bit of salt. We don't want to drown it in metaphor and simile. But I did find in the class that I'm teaching that it seems that a lot of people talk in simile, and that's the one that comes most easily, at least to the students in my classroom. It seems like simile is easier to come up with as opposed to metaphor. I don't know if you've had that experience personally as a writer.
Um,
Maybe we should say what the difference is for listeners.
I mean, you go ahead and make that distinction because I
I
think
would
that
say that simile is easily um, described by just using the word like. And that's how I remember it. It's similar to, so if you use the word
Right.
like or as in your sentence, most likely it's heading into simile.
Right.
Um,
And
like,
metaphor is where something stands for something else.
yeah, it
Right.
just is it. So,
Um, I mean, I really think that simile becomes, to me, simile gets, that's the one that gets the most tired, because I
yes,
think that
very
the
cliche. Yeah, yeah.
brave as a lion, crazy as a fox, those kind of things are so
Shot
like
out like a bullet.
yeah, yeah. I think that it's like, I think that becomes shorthand for not having a strong grasp of the scene in a lot of places. To me, when I read it, I mean, it either works really well, or it's like I don't really know how to uniquely characterize the character or the moment. So I'm going to say crazy like a fox. Like, actually, whenever I see that one, I think like most people who write that, myself included, I've never interacted with a fox. I have no idea how
hmm
a fox behaves, but yet I'm using this like simile, like I know. It always just it makes me chuckle. I think metaphor is braver and has bigger results, because that connection, and especially if you're in character point of view, because it's the character's connection to things, can really tell a lot. To tell a lot about who they are.
That's really interesting. Yeah, I like that idea of just making sure that you're referring back to the character's point of view. I mean, that's what we do as writers, but I think on that first draft run, when you are just typing in simile, cliche, whatever, if you're writing that out in first draft, that's okay because you're just trying to get the words out. But then
Right.
make sure you can go back in and be more unique um, with your words, with your similes, with
Right.
your metaphors, and
I mean, I think it's different.
coming up with a different way to say something is, well, one of the exercises we did in the class was to come up with two different nouns. They drew names out or words out of a little basket, and then come up with a way that you could make them be similar, like what the commonality was between them somehow, so you
Right.
could kind of practice creating ways of connecting different things
Right.
and finding their similarities.
Right. Yeah. I think there's a lot more to be had there between, like, I always think of like it's heavy, the thing was like a stone around your neck
Mm-hmm.
versus the thing was a stone around the neck. I think there's a very the same imagery there, stone around the neck, but something we've heard, again, something most of us have never experienced, but something we've heard. Um, I just think it's much more powerful to make it like it is that thing,
Yeah, metaphor is
rather
more
than
powerful, I think.
it's like that. I mean, and like that can be, I always try to think of like the similes as when a character is like feeling things out, when I'm trying to express uncertainty in a character, or he's he or she is trying to figure out a moment or trying to make a connection. It's like this or it's like that.
Mm-hmm.
When they get to that place of certainty, they're more grounded in the moment. Then it is that. I think there's a progression in how the imagery, um, how we see the imagery, or how the imagery is expressed through the character point of view.
Do you think that that's interesting? I've never heard that before. That all simile leads into metaphor or becomes metaphor as we read or experience something in real time or our characters do?
I just
Or
think
is
it's how I rationalize the choice when I'm making it.
mm,
That's just a personal style choice.
okay.
I think as a character is developing a point of view on something. I mean, I write a lot about characters explore, finding new parts of like engaging with their environment for the first time, like engaging with their old environment in a new way, or engaging in a new environment and trying to figure their way out. um, and I've just sort of rationalized, like early on in the story, as they're trying to figure out, it's more, they're in more of a simile place. They're comparing things. They're using the old, brave as a lion. They're like they're using their old frame of reference to make sense of the new thing. But as they go deeper into that environment and they become more familiar with it, and it becomes, instead of the new environment they're exploring, it becomes their environment,
Mm-hmm.
then it becomes more the world of metaphor, where it's like, you know, it is a stone around their neck rather than was like one. And I don't know. I mean, again, it's just I think every craftsperson decides how to use the tools that they have. And this is just, you need a rationale, like why this, why that. That's mine.
That's awesome. I really like that.
Thank you.
Um, Back to senses, using the senses in imagery. Um, I really love that emotion thesaurus.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's
yeah,
it's funny you say that. I was thinking about that this morning when you brought this topic up when we started talking about it.
yeah. I really think that I love rich setting and metaphor and simile, and I like reading it. And it's so funny to me, curious to me, that I don't write it easily, because when we're we always, you write in the genre that you read in, you write the stuff that you like to read. That's how you get started, that's how you get good, that's part
I
of
think so.
part of the
Yeah.
job. You can veer off into other things when you get bored, or you want to pivot to a new genre, but for the most part you write what you read. And I read books with rich settings, and I don't write that. And I think it's, but maybe we've talked about this on the podcast before, but I think it's because I do have such a, it's not empathy, it's like this visual. When I'm reading, I am experiencing what the character is experiencing. I am watching the movie of this book in my head as I'm reading. And if there is concrete sensory details about the visceral feelings, the physical feelings of emotions written on the page, then I can also feel those too. So then I really feel like I am, immersed in this story. And that's how I experience a book when I'm reading it. And
Mm,
when I'm writing it, the same thing is happening, I've discovered. So when I'm writing fiction, I am experiencing it just like I would be reading it, like living it, seeing it on screen. And
right.
so I think that a lot of my shortcuts in rough drafting happen because I already see it. Like I kind of feel like I think it's so vivid to me as I'm writing that I don't bother to put it on the page, because the instant connection is already there, especially when I'm rereading it and I'm thinking, oh yeah, I'm instantly there because I saw it when I was writing, but that doesn't translate to someone else reading it. So I think
Right.
that I need to slow down a little bit when I'm writing, or at least on an editing pass, and look at those visceral, look at this, at the senses. if i am if I am if my character is, I mean, I always use the word mad because it's easy to show anger.
Sure.
So, but if you're trying to do something else besides, what's another emotion that would be something you could
Sadness.
show, huh?
Sadness.
Sadness.
Joy. Yeah.
Showing sadness is, I think that's hard because it does look like there's so many different layers of sadness. Like, is the character pensive? Is the character afraid? Is the character like, what is the sadness from? Like, I kind of feel like there's always, so whatever backstory you've built in, this is a way to like let that bleed through without info dumping. You can show the character's sadness by how they're by using concrete sensory details of the senses. Like
Right.
what does it feel like? What does it look like? So if you're writing a point of view character, what does the sadness physically feel like in the body? And write that down. And
Right.
that's going to be so much more effective than it just saying the character was sad or witnessing
Yeah.
that. If the character is witnessing someone else be sad, oh, she looked sad. Well, so like what, don't just say that. Like what is happening on her body that made the character think that this other one character was sad?
I mean, I just to go back, and we could go on about this one for a long time, but I think it's just worth noting that that movie in your head is always going to be different than the other person's
Mm-hmm.
um, image in their, the movie in their head. And I think that the key is like, I think the dark and stormy night. Um, I always think that's a very just funny how that's become a
Mm-hmm.
meme. But like, a dark and stormy night is different for everybody. If you live in the southeast, it's a thunderstorm. It might be a thunderstorm with bursts of heavy rain. In the Pacific Northwest, it might be wind and light spatters of rain. A dark and stormy night is different for everybody. I think the key is like having writing story enough with enough grasp of the story, but enough grasp on the story that you master it, but enough openness so that the person who's reading it it's their storm. They're living, they can make that image in their head. You're not controlling the camera that's their imagination. You are allowing them. The story should be for them to set up their camera and say, okay, I know what a dark and stormy night feels like. I know what it sounds. I know the feeling when you hear the door open somewhere else in the house and you think you're alone. Like those are all sensory, that's all very imagery heavy. Just rely on them. The more you rely on them, the more their imagination, that reader imagination is going to
Rely on the
carry
character
through.
or rely on the reader?
Like, I think setting up imagery so that the reader is allowed to make their movie in their head based on your words. To me, that's the key, right? Because if you try to control it too much, try to make it so fine, like what that storm, again, we're back to dark and stormy night. You try to make it so exactly what you're seeing as this dark and stormy night. And the reader like is losing control. They're part of the control of the story. Like I think control of a story is mutual, should be mutual, should be shared, right? I'm setting
Co-created.
you up. I'm setting all these images for you to sort of imprint your own personal feeling onto it.
But there has to be enough to anchor the reader in the scene, though.
Yeah, yeah, but not so much that the reader is just like has no like they can't immerse in it because like immersing in it is like your own tactile experience,
Mm-hmm.
your own experience.
Yeah.
I think. I don't know. It's complicated. It's complicated. There's the balance there. If you're writing a screenplay, it's very stripped down. In fiction, it can be all the way up to, Proust and his description of cookies and be going on for pages on end. I think we have to find the balance that gives the reader agency, but also like shows mastery of the story. That's where good writing comes in, I think.
Yes. I like that idea. It's giving
Me
me
too.
things to think about. Hmm. I think also imagery, when we think about our fiction or nonfiction, if you write memoir, or even just creative nonfiction as a whole, when you are using literary devices like imagery, another thing that comes to mind is I guess, metaphor, I suppose. Maybe not metaphor, but it's when you use an image throughout the whole book, the same one, like a callback. And that can be
Right.
really meaningful too. And I don't
Yeah.
know, it has to be, I was going to say it has to be deliberate, but actually it really doesn't. I think when we're writing, sometimes it happens by accident and then we think, ooh, that was cool. And then we can beef it up in editing. But is there,
Right.
I mean, with Melville, you use your books are atmospheric and there often is a lot of imagery that reoccurs in the
Right.
stories and throughout the series. Can you share if that is something like that you do intentionally, or you've just sort of it's become second nature now and you don't think about it?
Um, I mean, I think everything is intentional. I mean, I think it becomes more so as we go deeper into a series because, at this point I realize like I've tr I've covered a lot of ground with him.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but I think there's a lot of happy accidents, and I think the other part of that is like every book, every story, every element, there has to be something unique. So trying to stay within the imagery, the motifs that I've worked with before, so that it's familiar, but also not. So there's this balance, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
you've got to come up with something fresh, but it has to be familiar, right? I'm in a small town. I can't keep going back to the bar, otherwise it becomes a bar story. So I try to find environments in the similar environments with so I try to find similar environments to the setting and then try to find like what fits the motif, the whole town, what fits for Whistler's Grove here, but also like what can be unique, like what about it can't just be any bar, it can't just be any junkyard, it can't just be any livestock auction. You want to put something unique in there. And then once I think for me, once I figure out what those unique elements are going to be in this story's new setting, then I can kind of like go back and kind of riff on that as I go. So it's a little bit about, where do I want to go that's new? What's going to be unique? And then how do I kind of riff on that motif as I go?
What's new and unique, and how can I riff on that?
Yeah.
How can I riff on that? Cool. I know we're running short on time. There's so much more that I want to say, but is there any like last minute things that you want to say about imagery or how we can use it?
I don't, I mean, I think it just it comes down to, I don't know. I mean, I think there's also, well, anything I say is going to open up a whole can of worms. So no.
I know. I was just going to say, like, I was going to start talking about theme and how like metaphor or imagery can like reflect the theme and should it reflect the theme. But there's so many different elements of imagery in a story that
Right.
that's just one of them. So yeah, if we start talking about that, we'll just
Yeah. It's a whole nother topic.
it's a whole other topic. All right. Well,
Yep.
there's a little bit of imagery talking for you. It was yeah, so much more, but there's the 101 for you guys
Yep.
on imagery.
Absolutely.
And yeah, we're out of time. So I will see you next week. Bye for now.
See you then. Bye bye.